My daughter told me I was too poor to attend her dream wedding at the prestigious Rosewood Manor, but what she didn't know was that I owned the entire estate, and when she tried to humiliate me in front of her future in-laws by disinviting me for being financially embarrassing, the look of absolute horror on her face, when the venue manager called her personally to cancel everything, was worth every sleepless night. I'd spent building my empire from nothing. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Let me start from the beginning, because this story isn't just about one moment of betrayal, it's about 28 years of sacrifices that apparently meant nothing when my daughter decided I wasn't sophisticated enough for her perfect day. My name is Diana Hartwell, and I'm 52 years old. To most people in Millbrook Valley, I'm just the quiet woman who runs the small flower shop on Maple Street. You know, the type always has dirt under her fingernails, drives a 10-year-old Honda, shops at discount stores, and wears the same 3 cardigans in rotation. The kind of person who blends into the background at parent-teacher conferences and community events, unremarkable, forgettable, poor. That's exactly how I designed it. What my daughter, Natalie, and frankly, most of this town doesn't know, is that Diana Hartwell owns more property in Millbrook Valley than anyone else. The flower shop, it's just my hobby, my way of staying connected to the community I grew up in. My real business is Hartwell Holdings, a property development and management company that I built from absolutely nothing after my husband walked out when Natalie was 3 years old. 25 years ago, when Thomas left us with nothing but a mortgage we couldn't afford, and a toddler who kept asking where Daddy went, I made a choice. I could either feel sorry for myself, or I could make sure my daughter never wanted for anything. So while she slept, I studied. While she was at school, I worked 3 jobs. While she played with friends on weekends, I was learning about real estate, property law, and investment strategies. The first property I bought was a rundown duplex on the wrong side of town. I lived in one half with Natalie and rented out the other. Then I bought another. And another. Each property I purchased, I renovated myself. I learned plumbing, electrical work, carpentry, anything that would save money and increase value. My hands became permanently stained with paint and calloused from manual labor, but my bank account grew. By the time Natalie was in high school, I owned 12 rental properties. By her college graduation, it was 37. Today, at 28, she has no idea that her poor mother owns 43 properties throughout Millbrook Valley, including the crown jewel of the county, Rosewood Manor. Rosewood Manor isn't just any wedding venue. It's a 19th-century estate, sitting on 50 acres of pristine countryside, complete with formal gardens, a private lake, and a ballroom that has hosted senators, celebrities, and old-money families for generations. It's the kind of place that books 2 years in advance and costs more for one evening than most people make in 6 months. I bought it 3 years ago, when the previous owners, the prestigious Whitmore family, fell into financial ruin. They had to sell quietly to avoid public humiliation. I paid cash, through my holding company, and kept the transaction as private as possible. The staff still calls me Mrs. Hartwell when I visit for business, but to them I'm just another property owner, checking on her investment. They have no idea I'm the same Diana who arranges flowers for their lobby twice a week. I never told Natalie about any of this, because I wanted her to understand the value of hard work, to appreciate what she had, and to treat people with respect regardless of their apparent station in life. I figured there would be time to explain everything later. Maybe when she got married, maybe when I decided to retire. I thought I was raising a daughter who would be proud of how far we'd come together. I was wrong. Last month, when Natalie announced her engagement to Bradley Whitfield, son of one of the wealthiest families in the neighboring county, I was genuinely happy for her. She'd found someone who clearly adored her, and despite their obvious wealth, Bradley had always been polite and kind during our few interactions. But then came the wedding planning conversations, and I began to see a side of my daughter I'd never noticed before. Or maybe I had noticed, but chose to ignore it, hoping it was just a phase. "We're thinking Rosewood Manor," she told me over dinner at her apartment, her voice taking on that dreamy quality she got when discussing anything expensive. It's absolutely perfect, Mom. Bradley's parents have connections there, and they think they can get us in even though they're usually booked solid. I nearly choked on my wine. My own daughter was planning to get married at my venue and she had no idea. That sounds lovely, sweetheart. But isn't that quite expensive? She waved her hand dismissively. Bradley's parents are handling most of the costs. They insist on paying for everything because they want it to be perfect. You know how important appearances are to families like theirs. Families like theirs, not families like ours. Of course, I said carefully. I'd like to contribute something to my daughter's wedding. That's when her expression changed. The dreamy look vanished, replaced by something that made my stomach clench with dread. "Oh, Mom," she said, her voice taking on that patronizing tone adults use with children who don't understand grown-up things. "That's so sweet of you, but really, you don't need to worry about it. I know money is tight for you and this wedding is going to be, well, it's going to be quite grand, the kind of event that costs more than, well, more than you could probably manage." I felt like she'd slapped me. "Natalie, I think you might be surprised by what I could manage." She reached across the table and patted my hand in a way that felt more condescending than comforting. "I love that you want to help, I really do. But this isn't going to be some small budget wedding. We're talking about 150 guests, premium everything, live orchestra, imported flowers. The dress alone costs more than you probably make in 6 months at the flower show." I pulled my hand back slowly. "I see. Don't take it the wrong way," she continued, clearly missing the warning signs in my voice. "It's just that Bradley's family moves in certain circles, and the wedding needs to reflect that. You understand, right? It's not personal, it's just business. Image matters in their world. Their world. Again, not our world." That conversation happened 3 weeks ago, and it was just the beginning of what would become the most painful month of my life. Because what came next made it clear that my daughter didn't just think I was too poor to contribute to her wedding. She thought I was too poor, too common, too embarrassing to even attend it. And that's when I realized that maybe it was time for Natalie to learn exactly who her mother really was. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The moment I discovered just how far my daughter's embarrassment of me went wasn't through a heart-to-heart conversation or even an argument. It was through a group text message that I was never supposed to. It was a Tuesday evening, and I was at the flower shop doing inventory when my phone buzzed with what I thought was a message from Natalie. Instead, I found myself accidentally added to a group chat titled Natalie's Wedding Squad that included her maid of honor, 3 bridesmaids, and Bradley's sister Vivienne. The message that popped up made my blood run cold. "Vivienne Whitfield. So we're all clear on the story for Saturday's venue walkthrough, right? If anyone asks about Natalie's family situation, we keep it vague. Bradley's parents are already nervous about the financial disparities. Maid of honor. Rebecca. Got it. But what if his mom directly asks about Natalie's parents? She's been pretty pointed about wanting to meet them. Natalie, just say my dad isn't in the picture and my mom is. Simple. Works with flowers. Keep it light, and change the subject quickly. I love her, but she's not exactly Whitfield family material. You know?" I stared at my phone screen, reading and rereading those words. Simple. Works with flowers. Not exactly Whitfield family material. The conversation continued, and each message felt like another knife to my chest. Bridesmaid. Ashley. What about the rehearsal dinner? Won't she be there? Natalie. That's still being discussed. Bradley's parents want to keep it intimate. Just immediate family and wedding party. I'm trying to figure out how to handle the mom situation without making it awkward for everyone. Vivienne. Honestly, maybe it's better if she just comes to the ceremony. Like she can sit in the back, watch her daughter get married, and then we do the reception with people who actually fit the vibe. No offense, but mixing social circles can be so uncomfortable for everyone involved. Natalie. That's actually not a bad idea. Mom would probably be more comfortable that way anyway. She gets so nervous around wealthy people. Remember when she met Bradley's parents for the first time? She was practically shaking and could barely string a sentence together. I remembered that dinner. I had been nervous, but not because I was intimidated by their wealth. I was nervous because I could feel their judgment, their subtle condescension, and I was trying my best not to let my real personality slip through, the personality of a woman who could buy and sell their country club membership without blinking. Rebecca, so she's definitely not coming to the reception. Natalie, I mean, how could she? The reception is going to be at Rosewood Manor. Do you know what that place costs per person? It's literally more than she makes in a month. She wouldn't even know which fork to use or how to talk to the other guests. It would be mortifying for everyone. I had to set my phone down and take several deep breaths. My own daughter was discussing my exclusion from her wedding reception like it was a kindness, like she was protecting me from my own inadequacy. Ashley, but won't people ask where the mother of the bride is during the reception? Natalie, we'll just say she had to leave early, family emergency or something. Honestly, most of Bradley's family won't even notice. They don't exactly move in circles where they'd expect to socialize with people like my mom. People like my mom. I scrolled up to see if there were earlier messages I'd missed, and what I found made everything so much worse. The conversation had started 3 days earlier. Natalie, okay girls, I need to talk through something that's been stressing me out. Bradley's family is paying for this entire wedding, and his mother has been making comments about wanting to meet my people and understand my background. Vivian, what kind of comments? Natalie, just, you know how Mrs. Whitfield is. She's very particular about family lineage and social standing. She keeps asking about my mother's family, what they do, where I get my refined tastes from. I've been vague, but I think she's starting to suspect that my background isn't as polished as Bradley might have led them to believe. Rebecca, what did you tell them? Natalie, I've been emphasizing my education, my job at the marketing firm, my apartment in the nice part of town, but the truth is, if Mrs. Whitfield meets my mom and sees how she lives, how she dresses, the way I'm worried it might change how they see me. Ashley, but your mom seems sweet. Natalie, she is sweet, but sweet doesn't cut it in the Whitfield world. These people summer in the Hamptons, and winter in Aspen. They think a weekend getaway means flying to Paris. My mom drives a Honda with a dent in the side and her idea of fine dining is Olive Garden. Can you imagine her trying to make conversation with people who own horses and yachts? Actually, I thought, I could imagine it quite well. I'd done it before, many times, in boardrooms and at high-end property negotiations. The difference was that in those settings, I wasn't pretending to be someone I wasn't. Vivian, so what's the plan? You can't hide her forever. Natalie, I'm thinking, minimal exposure. She comes to the ceremony, sits with some of my distant relatives in the back, watches me walk down the aisle, maybe takes a few photos, then she can head home before the reception. I'll tell everyone she wasn't feeling well, or had another commitment. Rebecca, won't she be hurt by that? Natalie, she'll understand. Mom's always been realistic about her place in the world. She knows she's not comfortable in fancy settings, and she wouldn't want to embarrass me or make anyone else uncomfortable. This way she gets to see me get married, and I don't have to worry about her accidentally saying something inappropriate or wearing something that doesn't fit the dress code. My hands were shaking as I scrolled through message after message of my daughter systematically planning my humiliation. But it was the most recent message, sent just an hour before I'd been accidentally added to the group, that broke my heart completely. Natalie, you guys are the best for helping me figure this out. I just want everything to be perfect, and having to worry about my mom fitting in was honestly keeping me up at night. This way I can just focus on marrying the man of my dreams, at the most beautiful venue in the county without any complications. The most beautiful venue in the county. My venue. The venue where I'd spent 3 years carefully restoring every inch of original woodwork, where I'd personally overseen the renovation of the kitchen and the installation of the sound system, where I'd walked through every room planning how to make it the perfect setting for exactly this kind of event. My daughter, my only child, the person I'd built this entire empire for, was planning to exclude me from celebrating the most important day of her life at the very place I'd created as a legacy for her future. I sat there in my little flower shop, surrounded by the simple, honest work that had become my cover story, and realized that I'd raised a stranger. Somewhere along the way, the little girl who used to help me plant flowers and who cried when other kids made fun of my work clothes, had grown into a woman who was ashamed of everything I'd sacrificed to give her a better life. But what hurt most wasn't her embarrassment, it was the casual cruelty of it all, the way she'd discussed my exclusion like it was a logistics problem to solve, rather than the devastating rejection of the person who'd loved her unconditionally for 28 years. I took a screenshot of the entire conversation before removing myself from the group chat. Then I sat in the quiet of my shop, surrounded by the scent of roses and baby's breath, and began planning exactly how my daughter was going to learn who her mother really was. Because if Natalie wanted a wedding at Rosewood Manor without any complications, I was more than happy to arrange that for her. After all, I was the owner, and it was time she learned that some complications are harder to eliminate than others. I didn't sleep that night. By 3 a.m. I was sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had gone cold hours ago, staring at the screenshots of that group chat conversation. Every time I read those messages, a new detail cut deeper. The casual way Vivienne had suggested I sit in the back, the clinical precision with which Natalie had planned my exclusion, the assumption that I would simply accept whatever scraps of my daughter's wedding day she deemed appropriate to throw my way. But what bothered me most was how confident they all seemed that I would never find out, how certain Natalie was that her simple mother would just grateful for whatever minimal involvement she allowed. By sunrise, I had made my decision. I wasn't going to confront her about the group chat, not yet. Instead, I was going to give her the opportunity to tell me the truth herself. I was going to see if my daughter would look me in the eye and lie to me about my own exclusion. I called her Thursday morning, my voice carefully neutral. "Sweetheart, I was thinking about the wedding planning and I realized we haven't really talked about my role in everything. When is the venue walkthrough? I'd love to see Rosewood Manor." There was a pause that lasted just a beat too long. "Oh Mom, that's this Saturday, but it's really just for the wedding party and Bradley's parents. You know, boring logistical stuff, nothing you'd be interested in." Lie number one. Of course I'd be interested. It's my daughter's wedding venue. Well, the thing is, they limit how many people can come on these tours, insurance liability or something. And Bradley's parents are bringing their wedding planner and she's bringing her photographer to scout lighting. Her voice was getting higher, the way it always did when she was making things up. It's going to be really crowded and chaotic. Lie number two. What about the rehearsal dinner then? When should I plan to be there? Another pause, longer this time. Actually, Mom, we've decided to keep the rehearsal dinner really small, just immediate family and the wedding party. You know how Bradley's parents are about intimate gathering. Lie number three, and the most painful one. Because she was excluding me from immediate family. "Natalie," I said quietly, "am I invited to your wedding reception?" The silence that followed was so long I checked to make sure the call hadn't dropped. "Of course you're invited, Mom." "Why would you even ask that?" But her voice had changed. It was the careful, measured tone she used when she was trying to control a conversation. "I'm asking because I want to understand what my role is in all of this. It feels like I'm being kept at arm's length from everything." "You're being dramatic. You're my mother, of course you're included." "Included how exactly?" "Because it sounds like I'm not welcome at the venue tour, not welcome at the rehearsal dinner, and you've been vague about everything else." I heard her take a deep breath, and when she spoke again, her voice had taken on that patronizing tone I'd come to dread. "Look, Mom, I think maybe we need to have an honest conversation about expectations here. I think we do. The truth is, this wedding it's a big deal. Bradley's family has certain standards, certain ways of doing things, and I need everything to go perfectly because this isn't just about one day. It's about how his family sees me, how they accept me into their world, and how do I fit into that?" Another pause. "Well, that's what I'm trying to figure out. I mean, you'll be at the ceremony, obviously, and we'll take beautiful family photos, but the reception is going to be very formal, very upscale, the kind of event where people talk about politics and business, things you might not be comfortable with." There it was. Not that she wouldn't be comfortable having me there, that I wouldn't be comfortable being there. You think I can't handle a formal dinner party? It's not that simple, Mom. These people, they're different from us. They talk about their vacation homes in Europe, and their children's private schools and their stock portfolios. What would you even talk to them about? Flower arrangements? The dismissiveness in her voice when she said, flower arrangements hit me like a physical blow. She had no idea that I'd sat in boardrooms with people exactly like the Whitfields, negotiating deals worth millions of dollars. No idea that I probably had more money in my stock portfolio than most of her precious guests had in their entire net worth. So what exactly are you proposing? I'm proposing that we be realistic about what works for everyone. You come to the ceremony, we take some lovely photos, and then you can head home before the reception gets into full swing. That way you get to see me get married, but you don't have to sit through hours of small talk with people you have nothing in common with. And this was your idea? It's what makes the most sense. Her voice was getting defensive now. Mom, I'm trying to protect you here. Do you really want to spend 4 hours making awkward conversation with people who summer in Martha's Vineyard? You'd be miserable. Would I be miserable? Or would you be embarrassed? The question hung in the air like a blade. That's not fair, isn't it? Because it sounds like you've decided that your poor simple mother who works with flowers isn't sophisticated enough for your new family. I never said that. You didn't have to say it, but I'd like to hear you say what you do mean. Clearly, no dancing around it. I could hear her breathing on the other end of the line, and I knew she was trying to figure out how to say what she really meant, without sounding as cruel as she actually was being. Fine, you want honesty? The truth is that Bradley's family operates in a very specific social circle. They have expectations about the kind of people they associate with, and while I love you, and while you've done your best to raise me, the reality is that you're not. You don't have the background or the education or the social graces that would make you comfortable in their world. Go on. Mom, you shop at Target, you drive a car that's older than some of Bradley's cousins, you've never been on an airplane, never eaten at a restaurant that requires reservations. These people own businesses and sit on charity boards and have advanced degrees from Ivy League school. What would you possibly have to talk to them about? Each word was like a scalpel precisely cutting away 28 years of love and sacrifice. And you think that means I shouldn't be at my own daughter's wedding reception? I think it means we should be smart about how we handle this. I think it means we should consider what's best for everyone involved. Everyone except me. That's not. Look, Mom, I knew you'd make this difficult. This is exactly why I didn't want to have this conversation, because you knew it would reveal exactly how little you think of me, because I knew you'd take it personally instead of understanding that this is about bigger things than your feelings. Bigger things than your feelings. My daughter, the child I'd worked 3 jobs to support, the girl I'd put through college without her taking on a single dollar of debt, the woman whose entire comfortable life had been built on my sacrifice, had just told me that her social climbing was more important than my feelings. I do, because I really need you to understand that this isn't about you not being good enough or me not loving you. It's about reality. It's about what makes sense. What makes sense? What makes sense is that you come to the ceremony, you watch me marry the man I love, we take some beautiful photos together, and then you go home knowing that you were part of the most important day of my life. Isn't that enough? Isn't that enough? After everything I'd given her, after every sacrifice I'd made, after building an empire I'd planned to leave to her someday, she was asking if watching her ceremony from the back row before being dismissed like hired help was enough. You know what, Natalie, you're absolutely right. You are. You should absolutely have the wedding that makes sense for you. You should surround yourself with exactly the kind of people you want to associate with, and you shouldn't have to worry about anyone who might not fit your vision of perfection. Oh, Mom, thank you for understanding. I knew you'd. I'm not finished. You should have exactly the wedding you deserve, at exactly the venue you deserve, with exactly the guests you deserve. Something in my tone must have registered because her voice became uncertain. What do you mean? I mean that you're a grown woman who's made her choices very clear, and now you get to live with the consequences of those choices. Mom, you're scaring me. What consequences? What are you talking about? You'll find out soon enough, sweetheart. Enjoy your venue walkthrough on Saturday. I'm sure it will be very educational. I hung up before she could respond. For the first time in 3 days, I smiled, because my daughter was about to learn that there's a big difference between what makes sense and what actually happens when you underestimate the wrong person. And I was about to teach her that lesson in the most expensive classroom in Millbrook Valley. After I hung up on Natalie, I found myself walking through my house, really looking at it for the first time in years. The modest 2-bedroom ranch on Elm Street that I'd bought when she was 7 years old, the same house where she'd done homework at the kitchen table while I studied real estate law by lamplight, the same living room where we'd watched Disney movies on Friday nights when I was too exhausted from work to do anything else but hold her close and pretend that everything was going to be okay. I had kept this house intentionally simple, even as my wealth grew. While I could have afforded a mansion in the hills, overlooking Millbrook Valley, I chose to stay here because I wanted Natalie to grow up understanding that happiness didn't come from material things. I wanted her to value people for who they were, not what they owned. Looking back now, I could see all the moments where I'd failed to teach her that lesson, and worse, I could see all the moments where I'd unknowingly contributed to her shame about our station in life. The pattern had started so subtly that I'd missed it completely. When Natalie was in middle school, she began asking why we couldn't go on vacations like her classmates. Sarah's family went to Disney World, she'd say, or Emma got to go skiing in Colorado. I always had the same response: vacations are expensive, sweetheart. Maybe someday when business is better. The truth was that business was excellent. By the time she was 12, I was making more in a month than most families in Millbrook Valley made in a year. But I was terrified of spoiling her, of raising a child who expected everything to be handed to her. So I maintained the fiction that we were just getting by, that every dollar had to be carefully considered. When she started high school, and her friends began getting cars for their 16th birthdays, Natalie came to me with a carefully prepared presentation about why she needed a car too. Not wanted, needed. She'd made a PowerPoint presentation on our old computer, complete with slides about safety and responsibility and how having a car would help her get a part-time job to help the family finances. I bought her a used Honda Civic, reliable, safe, but nothing flashy. I told her we'd gotten a good deal from someone who owed me a favor for helping with their garden. The look of disappointment on her face when she saw it parked in our driveway still haunted me. Not because she was ungrateful, but because I could see her mentally comparing it to the BMW Sarah had gotten, or the new Jeep that Emma was driving to school. "It's perfect, Mom," she'd said, and I could hear the effort it took to sound enthusiastic. "It's exactly what I needed." But I knew it wasn't what she wanted, and I began to notice how she parked it in the far corner of the school lot, how she never offered to drive her friends anywhere, how she always had an excuse for why someone else should pick her up when they went out on weekends. College was where the real damage began, though I didn't recognize it at the time. Natalie had earned a partial academic scholarship to State University, and I was so proud of her. But when we went to orientation and saw the other families, parents in expensive clothes talking about their vacation homes, and their children's study abroad plans, I watched something change in Natalie's face. "Mom, maybe you should dress up a little more for these events," she'd whispered to me after we met her roommate's parents, who were both doctors. I was wearing khakis and a nice blouse, the same outfit I wore to parent-teacher conferences, but suddenly I felt underdressed. "What's wrong with what I'm wearing?" "Nothing's wrong with it. It's just, these people are different. They notice things like clothes and shoes and stuff like that." I should have told her then that appearances didn't matter, that the content of someone's character was more important than the labels on their clothes. Instead, I found myself shopping for nicer outfits before visiting her at school, buying clothes I never wore anywhere else. The lies started small. When Natalie's friends asked what I did for work, she told them I was in real estate. Technically true, but she said it in a way that implied I was an agent or broker, not someone who arranged flowers and lived in a small house on Elm Street. When they asked about her father, she said he was out of the picture, but never explained that he'd abandoned us when she was 3, leaving us with nothing but debt and broken promises. By her sophomore year, Natalie had crafted an entire mythology about our family. According to her college friends, I was a successful businesswoman who preferred to live simply. Our house wasn't modest, it was charming and deliberately understated. My old Honda wasn't embarrassing, It was practical and environmentally conscious. I went along with it because I thought it was harmless. I thought she was just trying to fit in, and that eventually she'd outgrow her need to impress people with fictional versions of our life. I was wrong. The summer after her junior year, Natalie brought home her boyfriend Marcus, not Bradley, a different boy from a wealthy family who she'd dated for 8 months. Marcus was polite enough, but I could see him taking inventory of our house, noting the discount furniture and the outdated kitchen appliances. Natalie spent the entire weekend making excuses. "Mom's renovating soon," she told him when he commented on the old-fashioned kitchen. "She's just waiting for the right contractor. The house has such good bones," she said when he raised an eyebrow at the carpet in the living room. "Mom's planning to redo the floors next year. She's very particular about authenticity," she explained when he asked why we didn't have a swimming pool like his family did. "She believes in preserving the original character of the neighborhood, lie after lie after lie." And I said, I told myself she was protecting my feelings, that she didn't want Marcus to look down on me, but the truth was becoming harder to ignore. Natalie was ashamed of me, and she was ashamed of the life we'd built together. The breaking point with Marcus came when he suggested that Natalie spend the summer interning at his father's investment firm in the city instead of coming home to work at the local flower nursery as she'd planned. "You should think bigger than this," he told her, gesturing around our neighborhood during a walk one evening. "You're smart enough to do anything you want. Why limit yourself to this?" That night, after Marcus had gone to bed in our guest room, Natalie came to me with tears in her eyes. "Mom, I think I want to take the internship in the city." "Of course, sweetheart, if that's what you want. It's just, Marcus is right. I need to start thinking about my future, about the kind of life I want to build, and staying here, working at the nursery, it's not going to get me where I want to go." I asked her where she wanted to go, and she couldn't give me a straight answer. She talked about opportunities and networking and building my professional brand, but she couldn't tell me what she actually wanted to do with her life. What she could tell me, very clearly, was what she didn't want. She didn't want to be associated with small-town life, with manual labor, with the kind of simple existence that had defined our family. Marcus and Natalie broke up the following semester, but the damage was done. She'd gotten a taste of what life could be like if she distanced herself from her background, and she decided she liked it. When she graduated and got the job at the marketing firm, she moved to the nicest apartment complex in town, the kind of place with a fitness center and a doorman, and granite countertops. She furnished it with expensive things, wore designer clothes, and began cultivating an image of sophistication that had nothing to do with the girl who used to help me plant marigolds in the front yard. And through it all, I supported her, not just emotionally, but financially. When she couldn't afford the security deposit on the apartment, I covered it. When her student loan payments were straining her budget, I helped with those too. When she wanted to buy a new car to maintain her professional image, I co-signed the loan. Every time she needed money, I was there, and every time I showed up to help, I could see her hoping that none of her neighbors would see me, the woman in the sensible shoes and the practical clothes, who drove an old Honda and clearly didn't belong in her carefully constructed new world. But I kept helping because she was my daughter, and because I thought that eventually she'd realize that I was proud of her success, that I didn't need her to be ashamed of where she came from. I kept helping because I thought that when she found the right person, someone who would love her for who she really was, not for the image she projected, she'd feel safe enough to let me back into her life fully. When she started dating Bradley and told me he came from money, I was nervous, not because I cared about his wealth, but because I was afraid of what it would do to Natalie's already fragile relationship with her own background. But Bradley seemed different. When I met him, he was genuinely warm and kind. He asked me questions about my flowers, complimented my cooking, and seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me. For a few months, I thought maybe Natalie had finally found someone who would help her remember that family mattered more than appearances. I should have known better, because the closer Natalie got to the Whitfield family, the more desperate she became to prove that she belonged in their world, and the more desperate she became to prove that, the more she needed to distance herself from anything that might suggest otherwise, including sitting in my simple living room that Thursday evening. I realized that I'd spent 28 years trying to teach my daughter the wrong lesson. I'd thought I was teaching her humility and the value of hard work, but what I'd actually taught her was that our life wasn't good enough, that we had to apologize for who we were, that success meant leaving your family behind. Tomorrow, I was going to start teaching her a very different lesson. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in years. I opened the filing cabinet in my home office and pulled out every folder related to Natalie's expenses. I needed to see the numbers, needed to quantify exactly what my daughter's simple, poor mother had actually provided for her over the years. The first folder was labeled Education, and it was 3 inches thick. Natalie's college tuition alone had cost me $127,000 over 4 years. Not because I couldn't get financial aid. Our family income was low enough on paper that she qualified for significant assistance, but I had quietly supplemented every scholarship, every grant, every loan she received so that she would graduate debt-free. While her classmates were taking out tens of thousands in student loans, I was making payments directly to the university's accounting office from a separate bank account she knew nothing about. The receipts told a story that made my chest tight with a mixture of pride and bitter irony. Her dormitory fees, upgraded from the basic shared room to a private suite, because she'd mentioned feeling claustrophobic sharing space. The study abroad program in France, her sophomore year that cost $1 for a single semester. The unpaid internship in New York the summer before her senior year, where I covered her rent, food and transportation costs, because the networking opportunities were invaluable, but the position paid nothing. But education was just the beginning. The second folder was living expenses, and it documented a level of financial support that most parents couldn't dream of providing. The security deposit and first 3 months' rent on her luxury apartment when she moved to town. The furniture I'd helped her buy at high-end stores, because she wanted her place to make the right impression on colleagues, called $1,000. The car down payment when she decided her college Honda wasn't professional enough. 8. Then there were the smaller things that added up to staggering amounts over time. The monthly emergencies that always seemed to coincide with something she wanted but couldn't quite afford on her marketing salary. The designer clothes for important client meetings, the professional conference fees, the gym membership at the exclusive fitness club where important contacts worked out, the monthly hair and nail appointments that were essential for maintaining her image. I pulled out my calculator and started in the 5 years since Natalie had graduated college. I had quietly transferred $73,000 into her accounts for various necessities. Some of it was loans that she'd promised to pay back but never mentioned again. Most of it was outright gifts disguised as help during tough months. The third folder was the one that made me angriest: social expenses. These were the costs associated with helping Natalie maintain the lifestyle she felt she needed to fit in with her new social circle. The vacation to Napa Valley with her college friends, that she couldn't afford but couldn't miss because everyone would notice if she wasn't there. $3,200. The bridesmaid dress for her coworker's wedding that cost more than most people spent on their entire wardrobe in a year. The housewarming party she threw when she moved to the luxury apartment, complete with catered food and an open bar. My personal favorite was the receipt for her networking wardrobe, $4,500 spent in a single shopping trip, because she'd been invited to a charity gala and needed something appropriate for that level of event. When I'd questioned whether one dress really needed to cost $1,200, she'd explained that it wasn't just about the dress, it was about the confidence that came from knowing she looked like she belonged. The irony was suffocating. I had been funding her efforts to distance herself from me, but the fourth folder was what broke my heart completely: wedding fund. I had started this folder 8 months ago, the day after Natalie had called me breathless with excitement to tell me that Bradley had proposed. Even before she'd asked for any help, even before I knew what kind of wedding she wanted, I had opened a separate savings account and begun setting aside money for her special day. The plan had been simple. I would quietly cover whatever expenses the Whitfield family didn't handle, ensuring that my daughter could have the wedding of her dreams without any financial stress. I had already saved $45,000. And I'd been prepared to add more as needed. The folder contained printouts of venue costs I'd researched, catering estimates, photography packages. I had spreadsheets comparing florists and musicians and wedding cake designers. I had been planning to surprise her with an offer to pay for whatever she needed most, the photographer maybe, or the flowers, or the honeymoon. I had been planning to give her a wedding gift that would have covered more than half the total cost of her Rosewood Manor celebration. Sitting there surrounded by years of financial records, I calculated the total amount I had spent on Natalie since her 18th birthday, more than $250,000 invested in a daughter who now considered me too embarrassing to include in her wedding reception. But money was only part of the sacrifice. The folders didn't capture the opportunity costs, the vacations I never took because I was saving for her education, the house renovations I postponed because she needed help with her apartment, the retirement contributions I skipped because she was having a difficult month financially. They didn't document the social costs either. The times I'd turned down invitations to events because I was working extra hours to afford her expenses, the friendships I'd let fade because I was always too busy or too tired from maintaining the dual life of successful property owner by day and struggling single mother by night. Most importantly, the folders couldn't capture the emotional cost of watching my daughter grow increasingly ashamed of everything I'd sacrificed to give her. I remembered the conversation we'd had just 6 months ago when she'd gotten a promotion at work. I had taken her out to dinner to celebrate, and over dessert she'd started talking about her 5-year plan. "I want to really establish myself in this industry," she'd said, eyes bright with ambition. "Build the right relationships, get invited to the right events, position myself for bigger opportunities." "That sounds wonderful, sweetheart. What kind of opportunities?" "There's talk of opening a new branch office, maybe in the state capital, or I might look into moving to a larger firm entirely, somewhere with more prestige, better clients." "And what about personal goals, marriage, family, a home?" She'd smiled and reached across the table to squeeze my hand. "That's the beautiful thing about my relationship with Bradley. His family has connections everywhere. If we get married, I'd have access to a whole network of opportunities I could never reach on my own. If we get married, not when, if." And she'd talked about his family's connections, not his love or their compatibility or their shared dreams for the future. "What about me?" I'd asked, trying to keep my voice light. "What's my role in this 5-year plan?" "Oh, Mom, you'll always be important to me, but you have to understand, I'm building something bigger than just our little family. I'm creating a life that has real influence, real impact, and sometimes that means making difficult choices about which relationships to prioritize. Which relationships to prioritize." She'd been telling me then that I was becoming expendable, and I'd been too naive to understand. I pulled out one more folder, one I'd never shown to anyone: property portfolio, future plans. This folder contained the legal documents that would transfer ownership of all 43 properties to Natalie upon my death, the business succession plan that would make her the sole heir to Hartwell Holdings, the financial projections showing that she would inherit an estate worth approximately $12 million. I had spent 15 years building this empire with one goal: ensuring that my daughter would never have to struggle the way I had struggled. She would inherit not just money, but passive income streams that would provide her with financial security for the rest of her life. And she had no idea any of it existed. The daughter who thought I was too poor to attend her wedding reception was actually the heir to one of the largest property portfolios in the county. The woman who worried that I couldn't afford to contribute to her wedding had been working herself to death to build her a fortune. The girl who was ashamed of her mother's simple life was about to inherit an empire that had been built entirely through the kind of hard work she now found embarrassing. I closed the folders and sat back in my chair, staring at the evidence of 28 years of love, sacrifice, and planning. Every dollar in those files represented time I'd given up, risks I'd taken, dreams I'd deferred. Every receipt was proof of how much I'd been willing to sacrifice for my daughter's happiness, and in return she had decided I wasn't good enough to celebrate the most important day of her life. But as I sat there in my home office, surrounded by the documentation of everything I'd built for her, I realized something important. I didn't just have the power to withdraw my financial support going forward, I had the power to show her exactly what she'd been taking for granted all along. Tomorrow, Natalie and the Whitfield family were going to tour Rosewood Manor, the venue she was so excited to celebrate at. They were going to walk through the gardens I'd restored, the ballroom I'd renovated, the kitchen I'd equipped with state-of-the-art appliances. They were going to plan their perfect wedding at the most prestigious venue in the county, and they were going to do it without having any idea that they were walking through my property, planning their celebration in my building, relying on my staff to make their dreams come true. But that was about to change, because it was time for my daughter to learn that the woman she considered too poor and too embarrassing for her wedding was actually the only reason her dream wedding was possible in the first place. Friday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that made Rosewood Manor look like something out of a fairy tale. I knew this because I was there at 7 a.m., not as Natalie's embarrassing mother but as Diana Hartwell, property owner, conducting my monthly inspection with my venue manager Patricia Mill. Patricia had been running day-to-day operations at Rosewood for 2 years, and she was exceptional at her job. She was also completely unaware that the woman who arranged flowers in the lobby twice a week was the same person who signed her paycheck. The Whitfield Morrison wedding tour is scheduled for 10 this morning, Patricia informed me as we walked through the grand foyer. Premium package tour complete with champagne service and the full presentation. Mrs. Whitfield specifically requested our most experienced guide. Of course. And what do we know about this particular bride? Patricia consulted her tablet. Natalie Morrison, 28 years old, works in marketing. The groom's family is handling most of the financial arrangements. Apparently the bride's family situation is limited. According to the notes from Mrs. Whitfield's initial inquiry, the bride comes from a more modest background, single mother, small business owner. Miss Whitfield was very specific about wanting to ensure the tour focused on what the Whitfield family could provide, rather than putting any pressure on the bride's family for contributions they might not be able to make. I felt a familiar burn in my chest. Even the venue staff had been briefed on my supposed inadequacy. I see. And what's our booking situation for their preferred date? Completely open. In fact, we had a cancellation just last week for that exact weekend. The Pemberton family had to postpone their daughter's wedding due to a family emergency. It was quite fortuitous for the Whitfield booking. Patricia had no idea that the fortuitous cancellation had been arranged by me the moment I learned about Natalie's wedding date. The Pembertons had been graciously accommodated at our sister property in the next county, with a significant discount as compensation for the inconvenience. Perfect. I'd like to observe the tour this morning, discreetly of course. I want to ensure our service standards are being maintained for such an important client family. Absolutely. Should I introduce you if the opportunity arises? No, I said, my mind already forming a plan. I prefer to remain in the background. I'll be in the conservatory during the tour. If anyone asks, I'm just a consultant working on the garden renovation project. At 9:45 a.m., I positioned myself in the conservatory with a clipboard and a measuring tape, playing the role of a landscape consultant. Through the glass walls I had a perfect view of the main entrance and could hear everything that happened in the adjoining spaces. The Whitfield party arrived precisely on time in a caravan of expensive vehicles. Bradley's parents, Charles and Eleanor Whitfield, emerged from a silver Mercedes wearing the kind of understated luxury that screamed old money. Bradley stepped out of a BMW, looking nervous but excited. Vivienne arrived in her own car, phone pressed to her ear, managing some crisis that apparently couldn't wait, and then Natalie stepped out of Bradley's passenger seat, and I barely recognized my own daughter. She was wearing a cream-colored cashmere coat that I'd never seen before, paired with boots that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Her hair had been styled in an elaborate updo, and she carried herself with a practiced elegance that looked both natural and completely foreign to the girl who used to help me weed flower beds in old jeans and sneakers. But it was her expression that broke my heart. She looked terrified. Darling, you look absolutely radiant, Eleanor Whitfield said, though her tone suggested she was making an effort to be encouraging. Are you excited to see your venue? Beyond excited, Natalie replied, her voice pitched higher than usual. I've been dreaming about this place for months. Well, let's see if reality lives up to the fantasy, Charles said, checking his watch. Patricia, wasn't it? We're ready when you are. Patricia appeared with her usual professional warmth, and I watched through the glass as she began the tour with her standard welcome speech about the history and prestige of Rosewood Manor. The group moved through the foyer, admiring the crystal chandelier and marble floors, while I repositioned myself to follow their progress. As you can see, Patricia was saying as they entered the main ballroom. We've maintained all the original architectural details while adding modern amenities. The sound system is state-of-the-art, the lighting can be customized for any mood, and the capacity is ideal for intimate gatherings of up to 200 guests. It's even more beautiful than the photos, Natalie breathed, spinning slowly to take in the room's grandeur. Bradley, can you imagine our reception here? It's perfect, sweetheart, Bradley replied, but I could see him watching his parents' reactions more than admiring the space. Eleanor was examining the moldings with a critical eye. The restoration work is quite impressive. Do we know who handled the renovation? I'd want to ensure they used historically appropriate materials. The current owner spared no expense on authenticity, Patricia replied smoothly. Every detail was researched and executed to museum-quality standards. The chandeliers are original baccarat crystal, restored by craftsmen in Prague. The floors are original heart pine, refinished using traditional techniques. And the gardens? Charles asked. The photos suggest quite extensive ground. 50 acres of designed landscape, including formal gardens, a rose garden, walking trails and a private lake, perfect for wedding photography. Shall we see them next? As the group moved toward the garden entrance, I heard Vivian whisper something to Natalie that made my blood run cold. You're so lucky Bradley's parents are paying for all this. Can you imagine if you had to ask your mother to contribute to something like this? She'd probably have a heart attack just seeing the price list. Natalie's laugh was forced. Mom doesn't really understand this kind of thing anyway. She's more comfortable with simpler events. Well, it's probably for the best that she won't be at the reception, Eleanor said, apparently having caught the tail end of their conversation. These kinds of formal events can be overwhelming for people who aren't accustomed to them. I'm sure she'll be perfectly happy watching the ceremony and then heading home to whatever it is she does. Mom keeps herself busy with her flowers, Natalie said, and I could hear the dismissiveness in her voice. She's really found her niche there, like arranging flowers was some kind of consolation prize for not being sophisticated enough for real success. The group moved outside, and I followed at a distance, pretending to examine the hedge installations while listening to their conversation continue. The rose garden is spectacular, Bradley was saying. Natalie, didn't you say your mother grows flowers? Maybe she'd appreciate seeing this. There was an uncomfortable pause before Natalie responded. Oh, Mom's more of a practical garden. She grows the kinds of flowers they sell at grocery stores. This is more artistic. Well, perhaps she could provide some of the simpler arrangements, Eleanor suggested, for the guest bathrooms or something. It would be a nice way to include her with overwhelming the overall design aesthetic. Guest bathroom flowers. Eleanor Whitfield was suggesting that my contribution to my daughter's wedding could be providing discount flowers for the toilets. That's so thoughtful, Natalie said, and she actually sounded grateful for the suggestion. I'm sure Mom would love to feel useful, like I was some kind of charity case who needed to be thrown scraps to maintain my dignity. Of course we'd want to approve the selections first, Eleanor continued, just to ensure they complement the professional arrangements we'll be ordering from the city. Can't have clashing aesthetics. Absolutely, Natalie agreed quickly. I'll make sure Mom understands the color palette and style we're going for. I stood behind a topiary, listening to my daughter and her future mother-in-law plan how to manage my participation in the wedding, like I was a potentially embarrassing elderly relative who needed to be handled delicately. But it was what happened next that made me realize this wasn't just about social climbing or wedding anxiety. This was about something much deeper and more damaging. Speaking of family, Charles said as they approached the lake, we should discuss the seating arrangements for the ceremony. I assume your mother will want to sit in the front row. Actually, Natalie said carefully, I was thinking she might be more comfortable toward the back, where she can make a quiet exit if she needs to. Big crowds make her nervous, and I wouldn't want her to feel trapped if she gets overwhelmed. Nervous, needs to make a quiet exit. My daughter was painting me as some kind of social invalid who couldn't handle being in public. How considerate of you, Eleanor said approvingly. It shows real maturity to think about what would make everyone most comfortable. I just want Mom to enjoy the day without any pressure, Natalie continued. She's not used to formal events, and I know she'd be happier knowing she could leave whenever she wanted without causing a scene. As if my mere presence at my daughter's wedding was a potential disruption that needed to be managed. That's when I realized that this wasn't just about embarrassment or social insecurity. Natalie hadn't just decided I was too poor for her wedding, she had convinced herself and apparently everyone else that I was too mentally and emotionally fragile to handle participating in her new life. She had rewritten our entire relationship, transforming herself from the beneficiary of my sacrifices into my protector, shielding me from situations I was supposedly too delicate to handle. It was brilliant in a horrifying way. By casting me as someone who needed to be protected rather than someone who was being excluded, she had turned her rejection of me into an act of kindness. But as I stood there in the gardens of my own property, listening to my daughter and her new family plan my marginalization, with such careful consideration for my supposed limitations, I realized that the conversation I'd overheard was just the beginning. Because they weren't just planning a wedding, they were planning a future in which I would be permanently relegated to the role of the simple fragile woman who needed to be handled with kid gloves and kept at arm's length for her own good. And it was time to show them all exactly how wrong they were about everything. The tour concluded with champagne on the terrace overlooking the lake, where Patricia presented the final contract details to the Whitfield family. I remained hidden behind the garden wall close enough to hear every word of what would become the conversation that changed everything. The total package, including the ceremony space, reception hall, catering for 150 guests, and basic florals, comes to $48,000, Patricia explained, sliding the elegant folder across the wrought iron table. A 50% deposit secures your date, with the balance due 2 weeks before the event. I watched Charles Whitfield's face as he reviewed the numbers. Even for a wealthy family, $48,000 for a single day was significant money. Eleanor pursed her lips slightly, not at the cost, but at what appeared to be the mental calculation of their overall wedding budget. "And this includes everything we discussed?" Eleanor asked. "The upgraded linens, the premium bar package, the late-night catering extension, everything except upgraded florals, specialty lighting and additional decor items," Patricia confirmed. "Those would be handled separately through our preferred vendors." "What about parking?" Bradley asked. "We'll have some guests coming from quite a distance." "Complimentary valet service is included for events of this size," Patricia replied smoothly. Natalie had been unusually quiet during this discussion, and I could see why. The numbers being thrown around were staggering, more money than she made in an entire year. The reality of what the Whitfield family was spending on her wedding was finally sinking in, and with it the magnitude of her debt to them. "Well," Charles said, closing the folder with satisfaction, "I think we're ready to move forward. This seems like exactly what we envisioned for Bradley and Natalie's special day." That's when Natalie spoke up, her voice small and hesitant. Maybe we should think about scaling back a little. I mean, this is so much money, and I feel terrible that your family is carrying the entire cost." "Nonsense," Eleanor said briskly. "This is an investment in both of your future. The connections you'll make at this wedding, the impression it will create in our social circle, these things matter more than you realize. But I could ask my mother to contribute something," Natalie continued, clearly struggling with the weight of the expense. "I know she doesn't have much, but maybe she could cover the flowers." "Or, darling," Eleanor interrupted, her tone gentle but firm, "we've discussed this. Your mother's contribution will be her presence, and her love. That's what matters. Besides, coordinating payments from multiple sources just complicates everything unnecessarily." "Mrs. Whitfield is right," Vivian added. "It's better to keep the financial arrangements simple, especially when dealing with different economic situations." They were being kind about it, but the message was clear. My supposed poverty was too complicated to integrate into their streamlined wedding planning. "I just hate feeling like I'm not contributing anything," Natalie said, and for a moment she sounded like the little girl who used to insist on helping with every household chore. "You're contributing the most important thing," Bradley said, reaching for her hand. "You're contributing yourself. That's all I need." It was a sweet moment, and under different circumstances I might have been touched by my future son-in-law's romantic sentiment. But what happened next destroyed any warm feelings I might have harbored toward this family. Besides, Charles added with a chuckle, it's not as if your mother could actually afford to contribute meaningfully to something like this. What does she make from that little flower shop? 20-30,000 a year. This wedding costs more than she probably earns in 2 years, probably more like 3 years. Eleanor agreed. I mean, how much can someone possibly make arranging flowers for local events? It's sweet that she's found something she enjoys, but let's be realistic about the financial implications. I felt my hands clench into fists. They were sitting on my property, drinking champagne I'd paid for, planning a wedding in a venue I owned, and casually dismissing my financial capacity as if they had any idea what they were talking about. But it was Natalie's response that pushed me over the edge. You're probably right, she said, her voice carrying a note of what sounded almost like relief. Mom's always been very practical about money. She's never been interested in expensive things or fancy events. I think she'd actually be more comfortable knowing that she doesn't have to worry about any of the financial aspects. More comfortable. She was making my exclusion from the financial planning sound like a favor she was doing for me. It's actually kind of perfect, Natalie continued, warming to her theme. Mom can just focus on enjoying the day without any stress about costs or planning details. She can just show up and watch her daughter get married without having to worry about anything else. Just show up. Like I was a guest at my own daughter's wedding rather than one of the most important people in her life. That's very wise, Eleanor said approvingly. There's something to be said for keeping things simple for people who aren't accustomed to managing complex events. I managed a multi-million-dollar property portfolio with 43 different tenants, coordinated renovations across multiple states, and had personally overseen the restoration of the historic mansion they were currently sitting in. But sure, I probably couldn't handle the complexity of contributing to a wedding. Should we sign the contract then? Bradley asked, clearly eager to finalize the details. Actually, Patricia interjected, there is one small administrative detail I should mention. Our insurance requires that we have updated emergency contact information for immediate family members of both the bride and groom. Mrs. Morrison, I'll need your mother's current address and phone number for our file. Of course, Natalie said, rattling off my information without a second thought. Patricia made notes on her tablet, then looked up with a professional smile. And just to confirm, the address you've given me, that's 2047 Elm Street? The small blue house near the elementary school. That's right, Natalie confirmed, and I could hear the slight embarrassment in her voice even as she tried to sound casual. Lovely neighborhood, Patricia said diplomatically. Very authentic. That was code for old and modest in real estate speak, and everyone at the table understood the translation. Mom's lived there for over 20 years, Natalie said, as if longevity somehow compensated for the lack of prestige. She really loves the simplicity of it. My daughter was apologizing for my house to people who had no idea that I owned properties worth more than their entire investment portfolio. Well, Charles said, standing up and extending his hand to Patricia. I think we're ready to make this official. When can we schedule the next walkthrough with the catering team? As the group began discussing logistics for the next phase of planning, I quietly slipped away from my hiding spot behind the garden wall. I had heard enough. More than enough. I walked back to my car, the old Honda that had become a symbol of everything my daughter found embarrassing about me, and sat in the driver's seat for several minutes, just breathing. 28 years of sacrifice, of building something meaningful, of creating a legacy that I'd planned to share with my daughter when the time was right. And she had just spent an hour apologizing for my existence to people who thought a $48,000 wedding was a reasonable expense, while dismissing my entire life's work as a hobby that earned pocket change. But it wasn't just the money, it wasn't even the wedding. It was the realization that my daughter had become someone I didn't recognize, someone who would rather invent a fictional version of her mother than admit that she came from working-class roots, someone who would accept massive financial support from her in-laws while actively preventing her actual mother from contributing. someone who had learned to be ashamed of the very qualities that had built her comfortable life. I had created this monster by hiding my success, by maintaining the fiction of struggle, by allowing her to believe that our modest lifestyle reflected modest means rather than modest values. I had enabled her to develop contempt for everything I actually represented, and now she was about to marry into a family that reinforced all of her worst instincts about class and worth and social hierarchy. I pulled out my phone and called Patricia. Diana Hartwell here. I need to schedule a meeting with you this afternoon about the Morrison-Whitfield contract. Of course, Mrs. Hartwell. Is there a problem with the booking? You could say that. I'll be there at 3 o'clock. And Patricia? I want you to pull the complete file on this event, everything. The guest list, the menu selections, the vendor contracts, the payment schedule. Everything. Certainly. Should I prepare anything specific for the meeting? I smiled, and for the first time in days it felt genuine. Prepare the contract termination paperwork, we're going to need it. As I hung up and started the car, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: complete clarity. I knew exactly what I was going to do, and I knew exactly why I was going to do it. My daughter wanted a wedding that reflected her new values, her new priorities, her new understanding of what mattered in life. She wanted an event that celebrated her escape from her humble beginnings, and her integration into a world that measured worth in dollars and social connections. And I was going to give her exactly that. I was going to show her what happened when you rejected the people who actually loved you in favor of those who only valued what you could project. I was going to teach her the difference between having money and earning respect, and I was going to do it at the venue she had chosen. My venue, in front of the people whose opinions mattered most to her. Because sometimes the only way to save someone from their own mistakes is to let them experience the full consequences of their choices. And Natalie was about to learn that lesson in the most expensive classroom in Millbrook Valley. My meeting with Patricia that afternoon was brief and professional. Within 20 minutes I had reviewed every detail of the Morrison-Whitfield contract and made my decision. The booking would be cancelled. Effective immediately. Patricia was clearly confused by the decision. Canceling a premium booking was unusual for any business, but she followed my instructions without question. Should I cite a specific reason for the cancellation, she asked. Fingers poised over her computer keyboard. Venue unavailable due to unforeseen circumstances, I said simply. Standard cancellation clause applies. Full refund of any deposits already paid. And when should I make the call to the Whitfield family? I checked my watch. It was 4:30 p.m. on Friday afternoon, Monday morning. First thing. That should give them the weekend to process the news. What I didn't tell Patricia was that I wanted the weekend to unfold exactly as Natalie had planned. I wanted her to spend Saturday and Sunday glowing with excitement about her perfect venue, maybe even driving by Rosewood Manor to take more photos, calling her friends to gush about the champagne tour and the beautiful garden. I wanted her to have 2 full days of pure happiness before her world came crashing down. I also wanted time to prepare for what would come next. Saturday morning, I received the text message I'd been expecting. Natalie, Mom, the venue tour yesterday was amazing. Rosewood Manor is even more beautiful than I imagined. I can't wait for you to see it during the ceremony. You're going to love the gardens. I stared at the message for a long time before responding. Me? I'm sure it's lovely, sweetheart. I'm glad you're happy. Natalie, Bradley's parents are being so generous. I honestly can't believe how lucky I am. Sometimes I feel like I don't deserve all this. That message actually made me sad. For just a moment, it sounded like my daughter, the girl who used to worry that she was asking for too much, who always tried to make sure everyone else was taken care of first. But then came the follow-up. Natalie, Miss Whitfield suggested that maybe you could provide some simple flower arrangements for the guest bathrooms. Nothing fancy, just something sweet and homemade. Would you be willing to do that? It would be such a nice way for you to contribute something personal to the wedding. Guest bathroom flower, simple and homemade. A nice way to contribute something personal. I read the message 3 times. each time feeling a fresh wave of anger at how perfectly it encapsulated everything that had gone wrong between us. My daughter was offering me the privilege of decorating toilets at my own venue while the Whitfield family paid for everything that actually mattered. Me. We'll see, sweetheart. Let's talk about it closer to the wedding. Natalie. Perfect. You're the best, Mom. I love you so much. Sunday was quiet. No messages from Natalie, which meant she was probably spending the day with Bradley and his family, maybe planning more details or simply basking in the afterglow of their perfect venue tour. I spent the day in my garden, actually tending to my flowers for the first time in weeks. There was something soothing about working with my hands, about caring for something real and honest and uncomplicated. Monday morning arrived gray and drizzly, the kind of weather that made everything seem more dramatic. I was in my shop arranging a sympathy bouquet for Mrs. Henderson's funeral, when my phone began ringing. The first call came at 9:47 a.m. Natalie. Mobile. I let it ring. The second call came at 9:52 a.m. Natalie. Mobile. I continued working on the arrangement. By 10:15 a.m., I had received 6 calls from Natalie, 3 from Bradley, and 2 from numbers I didn't recognize but suspected belonged to the Whitfield family. My voicemail box was full. At 10:23 a.m., Natalie burst through the door of my flower shop. Her hair was disheveled, her makeup smeared, and she was wearing what looked like the same clothes from yesterday. She looked like she hadn't slept. Mom, she practically shouted, causing the 3 customers browsing my arrangements to turn and stare. Why aren't you answering your phone? I'm working, sweetheart, I said calmly, not looking up from the white lilies I was arranging. What's wrong? What's wrong? Her voice cracked. What's wrong is that Rosewood Manor just called and canceled our wedding. I continued working with the flowers, taking my time to adjust each stem. That's terrible. What happened? They said the venue is suddenly unavailable due to unforeseen circumstances. Unforeseen circumstances, Mom. What kind of circumstances could possibly make a venue unavailable with 6 weeks' notice? I'm sure I don't know, I said, finally looking up at her with what I hoped was an appropriately sympathetic expression. Did they give you any more details? No. Nothing. Just that they're very sorry but the venue is no longer available for our date. And they'll be refunding our deposit. They won't even tell us what the circumstances are. It's like they're hiding something. She was pacing now, her designer boots clicking against my shop's hardwood floor. The other customers had given up any pretense of shopping, and were openly watching the drama unfold. Maybe there's a structural problem, I suggested. Old buildings like that often have issues that don't show up until the last minute. Foundation problems, electrical issues, that sort of thing. But they just gave us a tour on Saturday. Everything was perfect. And now, 3 days later, it's suddenly unavailable. She stopped pacing and stared at me with wild eyes. Do you think someone outbid us? Someone with more money who wanted the same day? The irony of that question was almost too much to bear. Someone with more money had indeed taken the venue away from them, just not in the way she imagined. I don't know how these things work, sweetheart, but I'm sure there are other venues. Other venues, she interrupted, her voice rising to near hysteria. Mom, we sent save the dates 3 weeks ago. We've already ordered invitations with Rosewood Manor printed on them. Mrs. Whitfield has called all her friends to tell them about the venue. This isn't just about finding another place. This is about our entire social standing. Our entire social standing. Not her happiness. Not her marriage to Bradley. Not the celebration of their love. Their social standing. Natalie, I think you might be overreacting. Overreacting. She whirled around to face me fully. Do you have any idea what this means? Do you understand what Bradley's family is going to think? They've already invested so much money, so much time, so much credibility in this wedding. If we can't deliver the venue we promised, if we have to downgrade to some lesser place, they're going to think we're incompetent. They're going to think you're incompetent, or they're going to think I'm too poor to have contributed to securing a decent venue. She blinked at me, startled by the directness of my question. What? No, that's not what this is about, isn't it? Because it sounds like you're more worried about what the Whitfield family will think of your background than you are about actually getting married. That's not fair, Mom. You don't understand the pressure I'm under. These people have expectations. What people, Natalie? Your fiancé? The man who supposedly loves you? Or his parents, who barely know you? She stared at me for a moment, and I could see her struggling to find the right words. Words that would explain her panic without admitting how much of it was about impressing people whose approval she desperately craved. Bradley's family has been nothing but generous to us, she said finally. They've welcomed me into their world. They've paid for everything. They've made me feel like I belong. And now I'm terrified that this venue disaster is going to make them question whether I'm worth all the trouble. And if they decide you're not worth the trouble, what then? Then I lose everything, she whispered. And for the first time since she'd stormed into my shop, she sounded genuinely vulnerable. I lose Bradley. I lose his family. I lose the life we've been planning together. What about the life we built together? What about your actual family? She looked at me with genuine confusion, as if she couldn't understand why I would bring up our relationship in the context of her current crisis. Mom, this isn't about you right now. This is about my future, my marriage, your social climbing, I finished for her. That's not what this is, she snapped, but her face flushed red. Why can't you understand that I want more than what we had growing up? Why can't you support me in trying to build something better? Because you're not building something better now. You're building something based on rejecting everything that actually matters. What are you talking about? Before I could answer, my shop door chimed again. Bradley walked in, looking as frazzled as Natalie but trying to maintain some semblance of composure. Miss Morrison, he said, nodding at me politely before turning to Natalie. I've been looking everywhere for you. My parents want to have an emergency family meeting about the venue situation. What kind of meeting? Natalie asked, and I could hear the anxiety in her voice. They want to discuss our options, maybe postponing the wedding until we can find a comparable venue. Or maybe scaling back our expectations significantly. Scaling back how? Bradley looked uncomfortable. They're talking about the country club, or maybe the hotel ballroom downtown. Places that are available on short notice. The look of horror on Natalie's face was almost comical. The country club and hotel ballroom were perfectly nice venues, the kind of places where most people in Millbrook Valley would be thrilled to hold their wedding. But for Natalie, who had been bragging about Rosewood Manor for weeks, they represented a devastating downgrade. We can't have our wedding at the country club, she said, her voice small and desperate. Everyone will know we got kicked out of Rosewood Manor. Everyone will know we had to settle. Maybe, Bradley said gently, we need to think about what really matters here. As long as we're getting married, does the venue really? Yes, Natalie interrupted. Yes, it matters. Don't you understand? This wedding is supposed to be the beginning of our life together in your world. If we start with a compromise, if we start by settling for less than what we promised, how is that going to look? I watched this exchange with fascination. Here was my daughter, faced with a man who was trying to remind her about love and commitment, and all she could think about was appearances and social status. Maybe your mother has some ideas, Bradley suggested, turning to me with a hopeful expression. Miss Morrison, you know the local venues better than we do. Is there anywhere else that might work on short notice? Before I could answer, Natalie jumped in. Mom doesn't really know about upscale venues, Bradley. She's more familiar with smaller, simpler places. And there it was again. The casual dismissal, the automatic assumption that I couldn't possibly be helpful with anything that mattered. Bradley looked embarrassed by his fiancé's response. Of course, I just thought, maybe she might know of something we haven't considered. Actually, I said, setting down my flowers and looking directly at both of them, I might know exactly what happened to your venue booking. They both turned to stare at me, hope and confusion warring in their expressions. What do you mean? Natalie asked. I smiled, and began to enjoy myself for the first time in days. I mean that maybe it's time you learned something about the woman you've been so eager to hide from your new family. The silence in my flower shop stretched for what felt like an eternity. Natalie and Bradley stared at me with identical expressions of confusion and desperate hope, while my 3 customers had completely abandoned any pretense of shopping and were watching our family drama unfold like it was their personal soap opera. What do you mean? You might know what happened, Natalie asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I walked to the front of my shop, and flipped the sign from open to closed, then turned the deadbolt. The customers took the hint and filed out through the back entrance, whispering among themselves about what they'd just witnessed. "Sit down," I said, gesturing to the 2 chairs I kept near the register for elderly customers who needed to rest. "Mom, just tell us what you know," Natalie said, remaining standing. "If you have information about why Rosewood Manor canceled on us, I need to hear it right now." I said, "Sit down." Something in my tone must have penetrated her panic because she finally sank into one of the chairs. Bradley remained standing, looking increasingly uncomfortable with the tension crackling between mother and daughter. "Before I explain anything," I said, "I want to hear you tell me, in your own words, exactly what you think this wedding means." "What?" Natalie blinked at me. "Mom, this is not the time for some deep conversation about marriage. We have a crisis here. Our venue is gone. Bradley's parents are having an emergency meeting, and I need to figure out how to fix this before what? Before the Whitfield family decides you're not worth the trouble." Her face flushed red. That's a horrible thing to say. But it's what you're thinking, isn't it? You're not worried about marrying Bradley. You're worried about maintaining your membership in a club that you think will kick you out the moment you show any weakness. Bradley's family has been incredibly generous," she said, her voice getting high. "They've welcomed me. They've paid for everything. They've treated me like family. Of course I don't want to disappoint them. Tell me about your guest bathroom flower arrangement idea." The abrupt change of subject clearly threw her. "What does that have to do with anything? Humor me." She glanced at Bradley, who was watching our exchange with growing alarm, then back at me. "Mrs. Whitfield thought it would be nice if you could contribute something personal to the wedding. She suggested that maybe you could do some simple arrangements for the guest bathroom. Nothing elaborate, just something homemade." "Homemade," I repeated. "For the bathrooms. It was meant to be a kindness, Mom. A way for you to feel included without having to stress about expensive arrangements or competing with the professional florist." "I see. And where exactly was I supposed to sit during the ceremony?" Another glance at Bradley. "Well, we discussed, maybe toward the back, so you could have an easy exit if you felt overwhelmed by all the people." "An easy exit? You don't like crowds, Mom. You get nervous at big events. I thought you'd be more comfortable knowing you could leave whenever you wanted without having to walk past everyone." Bradley was staring at his fiancée with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Natalie, your mother seems perfectly comfortable right now. Why would you think she'd be overwhelmed by your wedding?" "It's not just about comfort," Natalie said quickly. "It's about fit. Bradley, your family's world is very different from what Mom is used to. The conversations, the social expectations, the way people interact at formal events. It's just not her scene." "Not her scene," I repeated. "That's not an insult, Mom. People have different comfort zones. You're happiest here in your shop, with your flowers, with people who understand lifestyle." "My lifestyle?" Bradley was looking increasingly uncomfortable. "Natalie, maybe we should focus on finding a new venue instead of—" "No," I said firmly. "We're going to finish this conversation first. Natalie, I want you to tell Bradley exactly what you told your friends about why I'm not invited to the reception." Her face went white. What are you talking about?" "I think you know exactly what I'm talking about." She stood up abruptly, panic replacing confusion in her expression. "Mom, I don't know what you think you heard, but I didn't hear anything. I read it. Every message in your wedding planning group chat where you and your friends discussed the mom situation and how to handle your embarrassing family background." The blood drained from her face completely. Bradley turned to stare at his fiancée with an expression of dawning horror. "Natalie," he said slowly, "what is she talking about?" "I can show you," I said, pulling out my phone. I took screenshots before I removed myself from the group chat. "Would you like to read about how your fiancée described her mother to her friend?" "Mom, please," Natalie whispered, but I was already scrolling through the images. "Here's a good one," I said, beginning to read aloud. "I love her, but she's not exactly Whitfield family material. You know? Or how about this one? She doesn't belong in that kind of setting. Oh, and my personal favorite. These people own horses and yachts. Can you imagine her trying to make conversation with them? Bradley's face had gone very still. You said that about your mother. Bradley, you have to understand the context. What context could possibly make that acceptable? The context, I said, continuing to read from my phone, is that your fiancée told her friends that I would be mortified by the expense of the reception because it costs more than she makes in a month. She said I wouldn't know which fork to use, or how to talk to wealthy people. Natalie was crying now, but I wasn't done. She also told them that she was worried about me accidentally saying something inappropriate, or wearing something that doesn't fit the dress code. Apparently the plan was for me to watch the ceremony from the back and then disappear before the reception, so I wouldn't make anyone uncomfortable. Bradley was staring at his fiancée like he'd never seen her before. You were planning to exclude your mother from our wedding reception. Not exclude, Natalie said desperately. I was trying to protect her, and protect everyone else from an awkward situation. Protect everyone else from your mother. You don't understand how different our worlds are, Brad. Your family has expectations, standards. My family has expectations about treating people with basic human decency. Bradley interrupted, his voice sharp with anger. We have standards about loyalty and family and respect. What we don't have is a standard that says it's acceptable to hide your mother like she's some kind of embarrassment. But she is. Natalie exploded, then immediately looked horrified by her own words. I mean, not an embarrassment exactly, but she's not like us, Brad. She doesn't understand our world. Our world? I asked quietly. What world is that exactly? The world where people have professional careers, and investment portfolios, and country club membership. The world where people vacation in Europe and send their children to private schools and know how to navigate corporate social events. Her voice was getting more desperate with each word. You work in a flower shop, Mom. You drive a 10-year-old car and live in the same house you bought 20 years ago and shop at discount stores. There's nothing wrong with that, but it's not the same universe as the people who'll be at my wedding. You're right, I said calmly. It's not the same universe. Your universe is one where a woman can build a multi-million-dollar business empire, and her own daughter doesn't even know it exists. The silence that followed was deafening. What did you say? Natalie whispered. You heard me. Bradley was looking back and forth between us like he was watching a tennis match. Mrs. Morrison, what are you saying? I'm saying that your fiancé has spent so much time being ashamed of her poor mother, that she never bothered to find out who her mother actually is. Mom, what are you talking about? You own a flower shop. You've always been. I own 43 properties in Millbrook Valley, I said, cutting her, including 12 commercial buildings, 18 rental homes, 13 luxury condominiums, and one 50-acre estate with a fully restored 19th-century mansion. Natalie's mouth opened and closed like a fish. I also own Hartwell Holdings, a property development and management company with assets worth approximately $12 million. The flower shop is my hobby, not my livelihood. That's impossible, Natalie breathed. Is it? Did you ever ask to see my tax return? Did you ever wonder how I could afford to pay for your entire college education without taking out loans? Did you ever question how I managed to help you with your apartment deposit and your car down payment and your monthly emergencies, without any apparent strain on my budget? Bradley was staring at me with his mouth open. You're saying you're wealthy. I'm saying I'm the woman who paid for her daughter's education, her lifestyle, and her entire comfortable existence, while she spent years being ashamed of my supposed poverty. But the house, Natalie stammered, your car, your clothes, are choices I made to teach you the value of money and the importance of not judging people by their possessions. Choices that apparently backfired spectacularly. I walked over to my desk and pulled out a folder I'd prepared that morning. These are property records showing my ownership of every building in downtown Millbrook Valley. This is my business license for Hartwell Holdings. These are bank statements showing my actual income. And this, I said, pulling out the final document, is the deed to Rosewood Manor. The folder slipped from Natalie's hands, papers scattering across my shop floor. You own Rosewood Manor? Bradley asked, his voice barely audible. I bought it 3 years ago. I've spent over $2 million restoring it to its current condition. Every detail you admired during your tour, the crystal chandeliers, the hardwood floors, the state-of-the-art kitchen, the landscaped gardens. I personally oversaw all of it. Natalie was hyperventilating. You own the venue. I own the venue where you were planning to celebrate your marriage to a man whose family you respect more than your own mother. I own the venue where you were going to serve bathroom flowers arranged by the woman who's been supporting your lifestyle for 20 years. Bradley sank into the second chair, looking like he might be sick. Mrs. Morrison, he said slowly, are you saying you canceled our wedding booking? I'm saying that I decided my venue was no longer available for people who consider me too embarrassing to be seen with. Natalie let out a sound that was half sob, half scream. You ruined my wedding because you read some private messages. I canceled your booking because I realized that I've been enabling you to become someone I don't recognize. Someone who would rather invent a fake version of her mother than admit she comes from working-class roots that built something meaningful. We can fix this, she said desperately, turning to Bradley. She's upset, but we can work this out. Mom, please, you have to understand. I understand perfectly, I said. I understand that you've made your choice about what matters to you and who matters to you, and now you get to live with the consequences of that choice. What does that mean? I smiled, and for the first time in days, it felt completely genuine. It means, sweetheart, that you're about to learn what happens when you bite the hand that's been feeding you for your entire adult life. The silence in my flower shop stretched for what felt like an eternity. Natalie and Bradley stared at me with identical expressions of confusion and desperate hope, while my 3 customers had completely abandoned any pretense of shopping and were watching our family drama unfold like it was their personal soap opera. What do you mean? You might know what happened, Natalie asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I walked to the front of my shop and flipped the sign from open to closed, then turned the deadbolt. The customers took the hint and filed out through the back entrance, whispering among themselves about what they'd just witnessed. Sit down, I said, gesturing to the 2 chairs I kept near the register for elderly customers who needed to rest. Mom, just tell us what you know, Natalie said, remaining standing. If you have information about why Rosewood Manor canceled on us, I need to hear it right now, I said. Sit down. Something in my tone must have penetrated her panic because she finally sank into one of the chairs. Bradley remained standing, looking increasingly uncomfortable with the tension crackling between mother and daughter. Before I explain anything, I said, I want to hear you tell me in your own words exactly what you think this wedding means. What? Natalie blinked at me. Mom, this is not the time for some deep conversation about marriage. We have a crisis here. Our venue is gone. Bradley's parents are having an emergency meeting, and I need to figure out how to fix this before what? Before the Whitfield family decides you're not worth the trouble. Her face flushed red. That's a horrible thing to say. But it's what you're thinking, isn't it? You're not worried about marrying Bradley. You're worried about maintaining your membership in a club that you think will kick you out the moment you show any weakness. Bradley's family has been incredibly generous, she said, her voice getting high. They've welcomed me, they've paid for everything, they've treated me like family. Of course I don't want to disappoint them. Tell me about your guest bathroom flower arrangement idea. The abrupt change of subject clearly threw her. What does that have to do with anything? Humor me. She glanced at Bradley, who was watching our exchange with growing alarm, then back at me. Mrs. Whitfield thought it would be nice if you could contribute something personal to the wedding. She suggested that maybe you could do some simple arrangements for the guest bathroom. Nothing elaborate, just something homemade, I repeated, for the bathrooms. It was meant to be a kindness, Mom, a way for you to feel included without having to stress about expensive arrangements or competing with the professional florists. And where exactly was I supposed to sit during the ceremony? Another glance at Bradley. Well, we discussed, maybe toward the back, so you could have an easy exit if you felt overwhelmed by all the people. An easy exit. You don't like crowds, Mom. You get nervous at big events. I thought you'd be more comfortable knowing you could leave whenever you wanted without having to walk past everyone. Bradley was staring at his fiancée with an expression I couldn't quite read. Natalie, your mother seems perfectly comfortable right now. Why would you think she'd be overwhelmed by your wedding? It's not just about comfort, Natalie said quickly. It's about fit. Bradley, Your family's world is very different from what mom is used to. The conversations, the social expectations, the way people interact at formal events. It's just not her scene. Not her scene, I repeated. That's not an insult, Mom. People have different comfort zones. You're happiest here in your shop, with your flowers, with people who understand your lifestyle. My lifestyle. Bradley was looking increasingly uncomfortable. Natalie, maybe we should focus on finding a new venue instead of. No, I said firmly, we're going to finish this conversation first. Natalie, I want you to tell Bradley exactly what you told your friends about why I'm not invited to the reception. Her face went white. What are you talking about? I think you know exactly what I'm talking about. She stood up abruptly, panic replacing confusion in her expression. Mom, I don't know what you think you heard, but I didn't hear anything. I read it, all of it. Every message in your wedding planning group chat where you and your friends discussed the mom situation and how to handle your embarrassing family background. The blood drained from her face completely. Bradley turned to stare at his fiancée with an expression of dawning horror. Natalie, he said slowly, what is she talking about? I can show you, I said, pulling out my phone. I took screenshots before I removed myself from the group chat. Would you like to read about how your fiancée described her mother to her friend? Mom, please, Natalie whispered, but I was already scrolling through the images. Here's a good one, I said, beginning to read aloud. I love her, but she's not exactly Whitfield family material, you know? Or how about this one? She doesn't belong in that kind of set. Oh, and my personal favorite, these people own horses and yachts. Can you imagine her trying to make conversation with them? Bradley's face had gone very still. You said that about your mother. Bradley, you have to understand the context. What context could possibly make that acceptable? The context, I said, continuing to read from my phone, is that your fiancée told her friends that I would be mortified by the expense of the reception, because it costs more than she makes in a month. She said I wouldn't know which fork to use, or how to talk to wealthy people. Natalie was crying now, but I wasn't done. She also told them that she was worried about me accidentally saying something inappropriate, or wearing something that doesn't fit the dress code. Apparently the plan was for me to watch the ceremony from the back and then disappear before the reception so I wouldn't make anyone uncomfortable. Bradley was staring at his fiancée like he'd never seen her before. You were planning to exclude your mother from our wedding reception. Not exclude, Natalie said desperately. I was trying to protect her, and protect everyone else from an awkward situation. Protect everyone else from your mother. You don't understand how different our worlds are, Brad. Your family has expectations, standards. My family has expectations about treating people with basic human decency, Bradley interrupted, his voice sharp with anger. We have standards about loyalty and family and respect. What we don't have is a standard that says it's acceptable to hide your mother like she's some kind of embarrassment. But she is. Natalie exploded, then immediately looked horrified by her own words. I mean, not an embarrassment exactly, but she's not like us, Bradley. She doesn't understand our world. Our world, I asked quietly. What world is that exactly? The world where people have professional careers and investment portfolios and country club membership. The world where people vacation in Europe and send their children to private schools and know how to navigate corporate social events. Her voice was getting more desperate with each word. You work in a flower shop, Mom. You drive a 10-year-old car and live in the same house you bought 20 years ago and shop at discount stores. There's nothing wrong with that, but it's not the same universe as the people who'll be at my wedding. You're right, I said calmly. It's not the same universe. Your universe is one where a woman can build a multi-million-dollar business empire, and her own daughter doesn't even know it exists. The silence that followed was deafening. What did you say? Natalie whispered. You heard me. Bradley was looking back and forth between us like he was watching a tennis match. Mrs. Morrison, what are you saying? I'm saying that your fiancée has spent so much time being ashamed of her poor mother that she never bothered to find out who her mother actually is. Mom, what are you talking about? You own a flower shop. You've always been. I own 43 properties in Millbrook Valley, I said, cutting her off, including 12 commercial buildings, 18 rental homes, 13 luxury condominiums, and one 50-acre estate with a fully restored 19th-century mansion. Natalie's mouth opened and closed like a fish. I also own Hartwell Holdings, a property development and management company with assets worth approximately $12 million. The flower shop is my hobby, not my livelihood. That's impossible, Natalie breathed. Is it? Did you ever ask to see my tax return? Did you ever wonder how I could afford to pay for your entire college education without taking out loans? Did you ever question how I managed to help you with your apartment deposit, and your car down payment and your monthly emergencies without any apparent strain on my budget? Bradley was staring at me with his mouth open. You're saying you're wealthy. I'm saying I'm the woman who paid for her daughter's education, her lifestyle, and her entire comfortable existence while she spent years being ashamed of my supposed poverty. But the house, Natalie stammered, your car, your clothes, are choices I made to teach you the value of money and the importance of not judging people by their possessions, choices that apparently backfired spectacularly. I walked over to my desk and pulled out a folder I'd prepared that morning. These are property records showing my ownership of every building in downtown Millbrook Valley. This is my business license for Hartwell Holdings. These are bank statements showing my actual income. And this, I said, pulling out the final document, is the deed to Rosewood Manor. The folder slipped from Natalie's hands, papers scattering across my shop floor. You own Rosewood Manor? Bradley asked, his voice barely audible. I bought it 3 years ago. I've spent over $2 million restoring it to its current condition. Every detail you admired during your tour, the crystal chandeliers, the hardwood floors, the state-of-the-art kitchen, the landscaped gardens, I personally oversaw all of it. Natalie was hyperventilating. You own the venue. I own the venue where you were planning to celebrate your marriage to a man whose family you respect more than your own mother. I own the venue where you were going to serve bathroom flowers arranged by the woman who's been supporting your lifestyle for 28 years. Bradley sank into the second chair, looking like he might be sick. Mrs. Morrison, he said slowly, are you saying you canceled our wedding booking? I'm saying that I decided my venue was no longer available for people who consider me too embarrassing to be seen with. Natalie let out a sound that was half sob, half scream. You ruined my wedding because you read some private messages. I canceled your booking because I realized that I've been enabling you to become someone I don't recognize. Someone who would rather invent a fake version of her mother than admit she comes from working-class roots that built something meaningful. We can fix this, she said desperately, turning to Bradley. She's upset, but we can work this out. Mom, please, you have to understand. I understand perfectly, I said. I understand that you've made your choice about what matters to you and who matters to you, and now you get to live with the consequences of that choice. What does that mean? I smiled, and for the first time in days it felt completely genuine. It means, sweetheart, that you're about to learn what happens when you bite the hand that's been feeding you for your entire adult life. The silence that followed my declaration stretched for nearly a full minute. Natalie stood frozen among the scattered property documents, her face cycling through expressions of shock, disbelief, and dawning horror. Bradley remained slumped in his chair, staring at me like I'd just announced I was an alien from another planet. You can't do this, Natalie finally whispered, her voice hoarse from crying. You can't destroy my wedding because you're mad about some stupid text messages. I'm not destroying your wedding, sweetheart. I'm simply choosing not to provide my property for an event where I'm not welcome. But you are welcome. I never said you weren't welcome. You said I didn't fit the vibe. You said I'd be mortified by the expense. You said I didn't belong in that setting. You planned to hide me in the back row and make me disappear before the reception so I wouldn't embarrass you in front of your new family. I kept my voice level, almost conversational. Those don't sound like the words of someone who considers me welcome. Bradley finally found his voice. Miss Morrison, I had no idea about any of this. If I had known what Natalie was planning, what would you have done, Bradley? Would you have stood up to your parents when they dismissed my earning capacity? Would you have insisted that I be treated as an equal member of the family instead of a charity case who needed to be managed? He opened his mouth, then closed it, clearly struggling with the realization that he had been complicit in my exclusion, even if he hadn't actively participated in planning it. I thought you were choosing to have a limited role in the wedding, Natalie said. You preferred smaller gatherings, that big, formal events made you uncomfortable, and you never thought to ask me directly what I preferred, Natalie said. a lot of things. The question is whether you believed them because they were true, or because they were convenient. Natalie suddenly grabbed my arm, her fingernails digging into my skin. Mom, please, you have to listen to me. Yes, I made mistakes. Yes, I said things I shouldn't have said. But this is my wedding we're talking about. This is the most important day of my life, is it? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like the most important thing to you is impressing people who wouldn't give you a second thought if you didn't have something they wanted. That's not true, isn't it? Tell me, Natalie, what happens if the Whitfield family decides you're too much trouble? What if Bradley's parents think this venue disaster reflects poorly on your ability to handle adult responsibility? What if they suggest postponing the wedding indefinitely while you sort out your family issues? The color drained from her face. They wouldn't. Bradley would never let them. She looked at her fiancé, clearly expecting him to reassure her, but Bradley was staring at the property documents scattered on my floor with an expression of complete bewilderment. Bradley, she prompted, her voice getting smaller. I don't know what to think right now, he said quietly. Everything I thought I knew about this situation was apparently a lie. My parents have been worried about the financial strain this wedding might put on your family, and now I find out your mother could probably buy our country club without blinking. You've been letting my family treat her like she's some kind of burden when she's actually, what did you say, $12 million? Approximately, I confirmed. Jesus Christ. He ran his hands through his hair. Natalie, do you have any idea how this looks? Do you understand what you've done? What I've done? What about what she's done? Natalie whirled around to face me, her desperation morphing into anger. You let me believe we were poor. You let me spend my entire life thinking we were just scraping by. You let me worry about money and stress about fitting in and feel ashamed of our lifestyle when the whole time you were secretly rich. I let you believe that the way we lived was a choice, not a limitation. I wanted you to understand that happiness and success aren't measured by material possessions. But they are, she screamed. In the real world they absolutely are. People judge you by where you live and what you drive and what you wear, and how much money you have. I've spent years trying to overcome the handicap of coming from nothing, and now you're telling me it was all fake. The only thing that was fake was your shame about where you came from. How can you say that? How can you stand there and pretend like class doesn't matter when you've been living a lie for my entire life? Bradley was watching this exchange with growing alarm. Natalie, maybe you should calm down. Calm down. My mother just destroyed my wedding and revealed that everything I thought I knew about my life is a lie, and you want me to calm down? Your mother didn't destroy your wedding, Bradley said, his voice getting sharp. You destroyed your wedding when you decided to treat her like an embarrassment instead of like family. Don't you dare take her side. You have no idea what it's been like growing up thinking we were poor, trying to fit into your world while being ashamed of everything about my background. Your background, I said quietly, is that you're the daughter of a woman who worked herself to death to build you a fortune you didn't even know existed. Your background is that you've never wanted for anything because someone who loved you made sure you never had to struggle. Your background is 28 years of unconditional support from someone you've now decided isn't good enough to publicly acknowledge. That's not fair. What's not fair is that I've spent decades sacrificing everything to give you opportunities you've used to distance yourself from me. Natalie was crying again, but her tears had shifted from devastation to fury. Fine, you want to punish me. You want to ruin the most important day of my life because I hurt your feelings. Go ahead, but don't pretend this is about teaching me some noble lesson. This is revenge, pure and simple. You're right, I said calmly. It is revenge. It's the natural consequence of treating people badly. It's what happens when you bite the hand that feeds you. Bradley, she turned to her fiancé, grabbing his hands desperately. You have to help me fix this. You have to talk to her, make her understand. Understand what? Bradley pulled his hands away. Understand that you've been lying to me for months about your family situation. Understand that you were planning to humiliate your own mother at our wedding. Understand that I'm apparently marrying someone who's capable of this level of cruelty to the person who raised her. Bradley. Please. No, Natalie. I need time to think about this. I need to figure out who I'm actually engaged to, because the woman I thought I was marrying would never treat her mother this way. The look of panic that crossed Natalie's face was almost pitiable. In the span of 30 minutes, She had lost her dream venue and was now watching her fiancé question whether he even knew her. "You can't be serious. You can't be thinking about calling off our wedding over this." "I'm thinking about calling off our wedding because I just discovered that my fiancé is someone I don't recognize. But I love you, and you love me. That's what matters." "Is it?" "Because an hour ago, I thought what mattered to you was starting a life together based on honesty and mutual respect. Now I find out what actually matters to you is impressing my parents and climbing social ladders and being ashamed of the people who've sacrificed everything for you." Natalie looked back and forth between us, clearly realizing that her world was collapsing in real time. "This is insane. Both of you are being completely unreasonable. Mom, you lied to me my entire life about who you were. Bradley, you're throwing away our relationship over one mistake. Neither of you is giving me a chance to explain or apologize or fix this." "What's to fix?" I asked. "You've shown us who you really are, Natalie. You've shown us what you value and who you value. The only thing left is for you to live with the consequences of those choices. The consequences are that you're destroying my life out of spite. The consequences are that actions have results. You chose to exclude me from your wedding, so I chose to exclude my venue from your wedding. You chose to be ashamed of your family, so your family chose to stop enabling your shame. But what about all the money you've spent on me? What about college, and my apartment, and my car? If you really built all this wealth for me, why are you taking it away now?" And there it was. Even in her desperation, even facing the collapse of everything she'd planned, Natalie's first concern was still about money. Not about our relationship, not about the hurt she'd caused, not about the years of love and sacrifice she'd dismissed. Money. "I built this wealth for my daughter," I said quietly, "for the girl who used to help me plant flowers and who cried when other kids made fun of my work clothes, for the child who was proud of her mother and grateful for the life we built together. That girl seems to have disappeared somewhere along the way." "She didn't disappear. I'm still here. I'm still your daughter. Are you? Because the daughter I raised would never treat family the way you've treated me. The daughter I raised understood loyalty and gratitude, and basic human decency. I can change. I can be better. You can start," I said, "by figuring out who you want to be when you're not trying to impress people who don't actually care about you." I walked to the door and unlocked it, holding it open. "I think this conversation is over. You have a lot of thinking to do, and I have a flower shop to run." Natalie stared at me in disbelief. "You're just going to throw me out? After everything that's happened, you're just going to dismiss me?" "I'm giving you space to figure out what really matters to you. When you do, you know where to find me." She looked at Bradley one more time, clearly hoping he would intervene, but he was already standing and heading toward the door. "Bradley, wait. I need time. Natalie, I need to think about everything I've learned today." "How much time?" "I don't know." As they both walked out of my shop, I could hear Natalie's voice growing more desperate, pleading with Bradley not to give up on them, promising she could fix everything if he just gave her a chance. But I closed the door before I could hear his response. Because sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is let them face the full consequences of their choices. And Natalie was about to learn that some consequences can't be fixed with apologies or promises or desperate negotiations. Some consequences have to be lived with. The rest of Monday passed in an eerie calm that I knew was deceptive. After 30 years of parenting, I recognized the silence that preceded a storm. Natalie was somewhere in town, probably frantically calling everyone she knew, trying to find a way to salvage her wedding and her relationship. Bradley was likely holed up somewhere, trying to reconcile the woman he thought he was marrying with the person he'd discovered that morning. And I was arranging flowers, the same way I'd done for years when I needed to think. The first crack in the silence came at 6:47 p.m. with a phone call from Eleanor Whitfield. Mrs. Morrison, her voice was crisp and controlled, though I could detect an undercurrent of barely contained panic. "I believe we need to have a conversation. Good evening, Mrs. Whitfield. How can I help you?" "I think you know exactly how you can help. Natalie and Bradley have told us about your revelation today, and about your decision regarding Rosewood Manor." "I see. And what would you like to discuss?" There was a pause, and when she spoke again, Her tone had shifted to the carefully modulated voice of someone accustomed to getting what she wanted through sheer force of social authority. Miss Morrison, I'm sure you understand that this situation affects more than just your relationship with your daughter. There are other people involved here, people who have made significant commitments based on certain expectations. What kind of commitments? Financial commitment, social commitments. We've already paid deposits to vendors, sent invitations to family members across the country, made arrangements that cannot simply be undone without considerable embarrassment and expense. I smiled, even though she couldn't see it. I imagine it's quite inconvenient. It's more than inconvenient, Mrs. Morrison. It's potentially devastating to both families' reputations. When word gets out that a wedding was cancelled because of a family dispute. Miss Whitfield, I interrupted gently, are you calling to ask me to provide my venue for people who have spent weeks discussing how I'm too poor and too socially inadequate to attend my own daughter's wedding reception? Another pause, longer this time. I think there may have been some misunderstandings about the guest arrangements. What kind of misunderstandings? Perhaps some overly cautious planning on our part. We were simply trying to ensure that everyone would be comfortable, that no one would feel out of place or pressured to participate in activities that might not suit them. Activities like celebrating my daughter's marriage. Mrs. Morrison, I think we may have gotten off on the wrong foot. Perhaps we should meet in person to discuss how we can move forward in a way that works for everyone. I'm not sure there's anything to discuss. The venue is no longer available. But surely, as a businesswoman, and I understand now that you are indeed a successful businesswoman, you can appreciate that sometimes compromises need to be made for the greater good. What kind of compromise? Well, obviously we would want to ensure that you have a prominent role in the wedding celebration, front row seating, a place at the head table during the reception, perhaps even a role in the ceremony itself. I had to admire her strategy. Faced with a crisis, Eleanor Whitfield was attempting to buy her way out of it by offering me exactly what her family had spent weeks insisting I was too inadequate to handle. That's very generous, I said, but I'm afraid my decision stands. Mrs. Morrison, please be reasonable. This is bigger than whatever hurt feelings may have developed. This is about Bradley and Natalie's future, about their happiness. Is it? Because from what I observed, their happiness seems to depend entirely on impressing people whose approval requires rejecting their actual family. That's not. Look, I'll be frank with you. Charles and I have already invested nearly $60,000 in this wedding. We've made commitments to friends and family members who are traveling from significant distances. We cannot simply call everything off because of a misunderstanding about seating arrangements. $60,000, I repeated thoughtfully. That is a substantial investment. Exactly. Surely you can understand our position. You've invested $60,000 in a wedding designed to celebrate your son's marriage to a woman who was ashamed to include her own mother. That does sound like a significant loss. Mrs. Morrison, Mrs. Whitfield, let me ask you something. If you discovered that your son was planning to exclude you from his wedding reception because he was embarrassed by your background, what would you do? That's completely different. Is it? Because from where I'm sitting it seems like exactly the same thing. The only difference is that you have the social standing to ensure it would never happen to you. The line went quiet for nearly 30 seconds. When Eleanor spoke again, her voice had lost its diplomatic polish. What will it take? Excuse me, what will it take for you to reconsider? Money, a public apology, some other form of compensation. And there it was. The assumption that everything could be fixed with the right transaction, that my feelings and my relationship with my daughter were just another business negotiation. Whitfield, there isn't enough money in the world to make me provide my venue for people who think I can be bought. I hung up before she could respond. The second wave arrived Tuesday morning in the form of Charles Whitfield himself, standing in my flower shop at 8 a.m. sharp, wearing a $1,000 suit, and the expression of a man accustomed to solving problems through intimidation. Mrs. Morrison, I think we have a problem. My wife tells me you were unreasonable during your conversation yesterday. I'm hoping we can approach this situation more practically. What did you have in mind? I'm prepared to offer you $50,000 to honor the original venue contract. I continued arranging the morning's delivery of roses while I considered his offer. $50,000 to host a wedding at my own venue where my own daughter would celebrate her marriage to his son while I sat in whatever corner they deemed appropriate for the hired help. That's a generous offer. I thought you'd see it that way. Unfortunately, I'm not interested in being paid to attend my daughter's wedding. Then what are you interested in? I looked up from the roses to meet his eyes directly. I'm interested in my daughter learning that actions have consequences. I'm interested in her understanding that family loyalty isn't something you can turn on and off based on social convenience. I'm interested in her figuring out who she wants to be when she's not performing for an audience. That's very philosophical, Charles said, his tone suggesting he found philosophy a waste of time, but it doesn't solve the practical problem we're facing. What practical problem is that? We have 150 guests expecting to attend a wedding in 4 weeks. We have vendors who need to be paid regardless of whether the event happens. We have family members who have made travel arrangements they can't cancel. That does sound complicated. It's more than complicated. It's a disaster that will reflect poorly on both families for years to come. Both families, well, primarily your family, if we're being honest. When people hear that the mother of the bride canceled the wedding venue out of spite, is that the story you're planning to tell? Charles straightened his shoulders, clearly recognizing that he'd overplayed his hand. I'm simply pointing out that there are reputational consequences to consider. For whom? For everyone involved, but particularly for Natalie, who will be seen as someone who can't manage her own family relationships. I set down my pruning shears and gave Charles Whitfield my full attention. Let me make sure I understand your position. You're suggesting that I should provide my venue for a wedding where I've been systematically excluded and humiliated, because otherwise people might think poorly of your son's fiancée. I'm suggesting that we find a solution that works for everyone. The solution that works for everyone is for your future daughter-in-law to learn how to treat her family with basic respect. Everything else is just damage control. Mrs. Morrison, you're being unreasonable. Whitfield, your family spent weeks discussing how to manage the embarrassment of my presence at this wedding. You planned my exclusion down to the finest detail, made jokes about my income, and treated me like a charity case who needed to be handled with kid gloves. And now you want to pay me to pretend none of that happened. We were simply trying to ensure that everyone would be comfortable. Everyone except me. He stared at me for a long moment, clearly calculating whether to continue with diplomacy or switch to threats. Miss Morrison, I hope you understand that this decision will have lasting consequences for your relationship with your daughter. I'm counting on it, and for her relationship with my son. That's between them. Bradley is very upset about this situation. He's questioning whether he can marry someone whose family creates this kind of drama. I smiled. Good, good. If Bradley decides he can't marry someone whose mother has standards, then Natalie will learn something valuable about the kind of man she was planning to spend her life with. And if he decides he can marry her despite this drama, then maybe there's hope for both of them. Charles Whitfield left my shop without another word, but I could see the frustration radiating from every line of his body. He was a man accustomed to solving problems with money and influence, and he'd just encountered a problem that couldn't be bought. The third and final assault came Wednesday evening when Natalie appeared at my house with red-rimmed eyes and a manila folder clutched in her hand. "Mom," she said when I opened the door, "I need to show you something." She looked terrible. Her usually perfect hair was unwashed and pulled back in a messy ponytail. Her expensive clothes were wrinkled like she'd slept in them, and she had the hollow-eyed look of someone who hadn't been eating or sleeping. "Come in," I said, stepping aside. She sat at my kitchen table, the same table where she'd done homework as a child, and opened the folder with shaking hands. "These are the cancellation fees," she said, spreading papers across the table, "for the caterer, the florist, the band, the photographer. $37,000 in penalties because everything was booked on short notice and the vendors can't fill the dates." I looked at the papers but didn't touch them. "The Whitfields are saying they won't pay the cancellation fees because the wedding cancellation wasn't their fault. They're saying it's a family issue that needs to be resolved by my family." "I see. Mom, I don't have $37,000. I don't even have $3,000. My entire savings account has $846. She was crying now, but quietly, like she was too exhausted for dramatic sobs. "And Bradley says he needs more time to think. He says he doesn't know if he can trust me anymore, doesn't know if I'm the person he thought he was marrying. What do you think? I think I've lost everything. I think I've destroyed my entire life because I was stupid and shallow and horrible to the person who's done everything for me. And I don't know how to fix it. I don't know how to make any of this right. I sat down across from her at the table where I'd helped her with math homework and listened to her practice school presentations, and celebrated every achievement and milestone of her life. Natalie, I said gently, what do you think you should do? I think I should apologize. I think I should beg you to forgive me and help me and save me from the mess I've made. Is that what you want to do? It's what I need to do. That's not what I asked. She looked up at me with confusion. What do you mean? I mean, do you actually understand what you did wrong, or are you just sorry because it didn't work out the way you planned? I hurt you. I said terrible things about you and made plans that excluded you and treated you like an embarrassment. Why? Because I was ashamed. Because I wanted to fit in with Bradley's family and I thought you would make me look, say it, poor. I thought you would make me look poor and unsophisticated and like I didn't belong in their world. And now I know that I was wrong about everything. About you, about money, about what matters. Do you? Or do you just know that your strategy didn't work? She stared at me across the table and I could see her struggling with the question I was really asking. Had she learned something? Or was she just sorry she got caught? I don't know, she whispered finally. I don't know the difference anymore. And that, I realized, was the first honest thing she'd said to me in years. That conversation at my kitchen table marked the beginning of the hardest 6 months of both our lives. I didn't rescue Natalie from her financial mess, didn't swoop in to save her from the consequences of her choices, didn't restore her venue booking or fix her relationship with Bradley. Instead, I did something much more difficult. I loved her enough to let her figure it out herself. The wedding was officially canceled 3 days later when Bradley called off the engagement. He didn't do it out of anger or spite in the end. Bradley Whitfield proved to be a better man than I'd initially given him credit for. He simply realized that he couldn't marry someone he no longer trusted, someone whose values were so fundamentally different from his own. Natalie moved out of her luxury apartment and into a modest one-bedroom place she could actually afford on her marketing salary. She sold the expensive furniture, the designer clothes and the car I'd helped her buy. She picked up weekend work, catering events to help pay off the cancellation fees, which took her nearly 8 months to clear. But the hardest part wasn't the financial struggle, it was the social reckoning. Word got out, the way it always does in small towns, about what had really happened. The story that circulated wasn't the one the Whitfield family had tried to craft about family drama disrupting their son's wedding. The real story was worse for Natalie and better for me. A successful businesswoman had discovered her daughter was ashamed of her and had refused to enable that shame any longer. People in Millbrook Valley began looking at me differently. Some had always suspected there was more to my story than a simple flower shop, and the revelation about my property holdings confirmed what they'd wondered about for years. Others were shocked to learn that the quiet woman who arranged their centerpieces and bouquets was actually one of the wealthiest people in town. But the most interesting shift was in how people looked at Natalie. The sympathy she might have received as the victim of her mother's unreasonable behavior evaporated when the full story emerged. Instead, she faced something she'd never experienced before: social consequences for treating family badly. She lost some friends, the ones who had been part of her wedding squad, and who couldn't reconcile the generous mother I actually was with the burden they'd helped her plan to manage. She kept others, the ones who understood that people make mistakes and deserve chances to learn from them. For the first 3 months after the canceled wedding, Natalie and I barely spoke. When we did communicate, it was through careful formal text messages about practical matters. She didn't ask for money, and I didn't offer any. She didn't apologize again, and I didn't push for one. I knew she needed time to figure out who she was when she wasn't performing for an audience, when she wasn't trying to impress people whose approval required rejecting her family, and I needed time to decide whether the daughter I'd raised was still somewhere inside the woman she'd become. The turning point came on a Tuesday morning in late spring, when I found Natalie sitting on my front porch at 6 a.m., holding 2 cups of coffee from the gas station down the street. I've been thinking, she said when I opened the door, about what you asked me that night, about whether I understand what I did wrong or if I'm just sorry it didn't work out the way I planned. I sat down beside her on the porch swing, accepting the coffee she offered, and I think it was both. I think I was sorry I got caught, sorry my plan backfired, sorry I lost everything I thought I wanted, but I think I was also genuinely sorry for how I treated you, even if I didn't fully understand why it was wrong at the time. And now I think I'm starting to understand the difference. She took a sip of her coffee, staring out at the street where she'd learned to ride a bike 20 years earlier. I spent so many years being ashamed of this house, this neighborhood, the way we live. I thought if I could just distance myself enough from all of it, I could become someone different, someone better, someone worthy of the Whitfield family's approval, someone worthy of anybody's approval. Really, I was so focused on becoming the kind of person who belonged in fancy places that I forgot to become the kind of person worth belonging anywhere. We sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching the neighborhood wake up around us. I've been going to therapy, she said eventually, trying to figure out how I became someone who could treat you the way I did, trying to understand why I needed approval from people who didn't even know me, more than I needed a relationship with the person who raised me. What has therapy taught you? That I was trying to earn love from people who were never going to give it to me, while taking for granted the love I already had from someone who'd proven it every day for 28 years. I felt tears prick at my eyes, but I blinked them back. That's a hard lesson to learn. The hardest part is realizing that I might have destroyed the most important relationship in my life, because I was chasing relationships that were never real to begin with. Have you? I asked quietly. Destroyed it? She turned to look at me directly for the first time in months. I don't know, have I? I studied my daughter's face, really looked at her and saw something I hadn't seen in years. The pretense was gone. The careful performance she'd been maintaining for so long had finally cracked. She looked exhausted and sad and uncertain, but she also looked real in a way she hadn't since she was a teenager. That depends, I said finally, on who you decide to be going forward. I want to be someone you can be proud of again, Natalie. I was always proud of you. I was proud of your academic achievements, your professional success, your ambition, your intelligence. What I wasn't proud of was how you let other people's opinions matter more than your family's feelings. I know, and I want to change that. I want to be the kind of person who lifts up the people who've lifted her up instead of pushing them away. That's a good goal, but it's going to take time to rebuild trust. I know, and I know I don't have any right to ask for your help while I figure out how to be better, but I'm asking anyway, because you're the only person who's ever loved me unconditionally, and I finally understand how rare and precious that is. I reached over and took her hand, the same hand I'd held when she crossed streets as a little girl when she was nervous before school presentations, when she'd graduated from college. I never stopped loving you, even when I didn't like your choices. Even when you hurt me, even when I had to set boundaries to protect myself, I never stopped loving you, even after everything I said, everything I did, especially after everything you said and did, because that's when you needed love the most, even if you didn't deserve it. She started crying then, real tears, not the desperate sobs of someone trying to manipulate a situation, but the quiet, relieved tears of someone who'd been carrying a burden too heavy for too long. I don't know how to make this right, she whispered. You don't make it right all at once. You make it right one choice at a time, one day at a time, one opportunity at a time. We talked for 3 hours that morning, sitting on my porch as the sun came up over the neighborhood where I'd chosen to raise her. We talked about the lies she'd told herself about our life, the shame she'd carried about our background, the fear that had driven her to push away the people who actually cared about her. But we also talked about the future, about the woman she wanted to become, and the relationship she wanted to build with me, about the difference between earning respect and demanding it, between having wealth and having worth. It wasn't a magic conversation that fixed everything instantly. Trust, once broken, doesn't repair itself overnight, but it was a beginning, the first honest conversation we'd had in years, and the foundation for whatever came next. 6 months later, Natalie started working part-time at my flower shop on weekends, not because she needed the money, though the extra income helped with her debt payments, but because she wanted to understand the business I'd built, the work I'd always been proud of, the life I'd chosen to live. She was good with customers, patient with difficult arrangements, and surprisingly creative with design. More importantly, she seemed genuinely happy working with her hands, creating something beautiful and simple and on. A year after the cancelled wedding, I offered to make her a partner in Hartwell Holdings, not an heir waiting for me to die, but an active partner in building and managing the business we could create together. She turned me down. "I'm not ready for that kind of responsibility yet," she said. "I need to prove to myself that I can build something on my own before I accept a role in something you built." That refusal told me more about her growth than any apology ever could. Today, 2 years later, Natalie runs her own small event planning business. She specializes in intimate, authentic celebrations, the kind of weddings and parties where people focus on connection rather than impression, where families come together to celebrate rather than compete. She's not wealthy like I am, but she's successful in a way that matters. She's built a reputation for integrity and creativity, and more importantly, she's built a life based on her own values, rather than other people's expectations. We have dinner together every Sunday now, usually at my kitchen table, usually with flowers from my garden as the centerpiece. We talk about her business, my properties, books we've read, places we'd like to travel together someday, and sometimes when the conversation lulls, and we're just sitting together in comfortable silence, I look at my daughter, and see the woman I always hoped she'd become, someone who understands that wealth is meaningless without integrity, that success is hollow without family, and that the most valuable inheritance a parent can leave their child isn't money, it's the knowledge of how to love and be loved without condition. The most expensive lesson I ever taught her was that actions have consequences, and that some consequences can't be bought, negotiated, or wished away. But the most valuable lesson she learned was that unconditional love doesn't mean accepting unacceptable behavior. It means loving someone enough to hold them accountable for becoming their best self. And in the end, that lesson was worth more than all the property portfolios and wedding venues in the world. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.